Makulay na buhay, everyone! I'm Liza Balungkas, and with me is
Mrs. Diosa Ismaliari. We are the group 3 and we will be talking about the educational theories. Another member of the group is Mrs. Rose Jane Isumalino, who is working behind the scene.
Yes, Mommy D. Now, we will be talking about educational theories. What do you think is educational theory then?
Well, educational theory, I think it has something to do with the different theories about education. What do you think, Ma'am Laila?
You might be correct. So, let's find out. Let's find out if you got it correct, Mommy D.
Okay.
Educational theory is an overarching term that describes a collection of theories that explain the application, the interpretation, and the purpose of learning and education.
So what are we waiting for? Let us find out the different theories in education.
Okay. At the end of this session, you are expected to differentiate the educational theories of education and identify the theories of education that is most appropriate at present time. Before we proceed to our topic, let us have an activity. Presented to you are jumbled letters. I would like you to arrange these letters to form a word or words suitable to the given meaning. First one is, and it means an outlook or system of thought that focuses on human beings rather than supernatural or divine insight. Very good. That is humanism. Next is, and it means it focuses on the idea that all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment. That is correct. It is behaviorism. Next is, it is a learning theory that focuses on how information is received, organized, stored, and retrieved by the mind. Correct. That is cognitivism. Next is, it means that all knowledge developed as a result of social interaction and language use and is therefore a shared rather than an individual experience. What do you think it is? Correct. That is social constructivism. Next is, it emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. What do you think it is? Correct. That is social learning theory. Education is all about the transfer of knowledge. No matter how many times we reinvent it, innovate it, or try to change its course, it is and will be about that. And for centuries, teachers dictating and students learning has it been. But that's not just all. There has been some tremendous efforts and time put into education since time immemorial. People has been developing theories and devising solutions intended for education. And we intend to discuss some of those theories today. First, we have behaviorism by Ivan Pavlov and B.F. Skinner. Another theory is cognitivism, that is from Jean Piaget, Jerome Bruner, and David Ausubel. Another learning educational theory is the social learning theory of Albert Bandura. Next is social constructivism by Lev Vygotsky. And we also have connectivism by George Simons and Stephen Downes. And so with the humanism by Abraham Maslow. The first one we are going to tackle is the behaviorism. Behaviorism focuses on the idea that all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment. According to the school of thought, also known as behavioral psychology, behavior can be studied in a systematic and observable manner, regardless of internal mental states. Behavioral theory also says that only observable behavior should be studied, as cognition, emotions, and mood are far too subjective. Strict behaviorists believe that any person, regardless of genetic background, personality traits, and internal thoughts, can be trained to perform any tasks within the limits of their physical capabilities. It only requires the right conditioning. This particular learning theory assumes the learner as essentially passive, who simply responds to their environmental stimuli. So, the behaviorist theorists believe that a learner basically begins as a clean slate, and their behavior is shaped through positive or negative reinforcements. Both positive and negative reinforcements increases or decreases the chance of the behavior happening again. So, punishments and rewards alternatively decrease or increase the likelihood of a behavior happening again. Positive indicates that the application of a stimulus, and negative indicates the withholding of a stimulus. Therefore, learning is defined as an implied change in the behavior of the learner. Behaviorism, it is confined to observable and measurable behavior. Learning is defined by the outward expression of new behaviors and context independent. It is biological basis for learning and focuses on observable behavior. Two techniques used in the behaviorism. One is classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, and the other one is the operant conditioning by B.F. Skinner. Now let's talk about the classical conditioning first. Classical conditioning is a technique frequently used in behavioral training in which a neutral stimulus is paired with a naturally occurring stimulus. Eventually, the neutral stimulus comes to evoke the same response as the naturally occurring stimulus, even without the naturally occurring stimulus presenting itself. In short, a stimulus is presented in order to get a response. And throughout the course of three distinct phases of classical conditioning, the associated stimulus becomes known as the conditioned stimulus, and the learned behavior is known as the conditioned response. Classical conditioning is all about reflexes. Now let's take a look at these examples. If the teacher is consistent and repetitive with these stimuli, eventually the students will learn to behave properly through the classical conditioning. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, three distinct phases of classical conditioning. It is before conditioning, during conditioning, and after conditioning. If the teacher counts down from 1 to 10, then the students will not clean up. But if the teacher tells the class to clean up, then the students will clean up. That's before conditioning. During the conditioning, If the teacher tells the class to clean up and counts down from 1 to 10, then the students will clean up. And after conditioning, if the teacher counts down from 1 to 10, then the students will clean up. The student's behavior has been conditioned. Operant conditioning, sometimes referred to as instrumental conditioning, is described by behaviorist B.F. Skinner as the process in which learning can occur through reinforcement and punishment. More specifically, by forming an association between a certain behavior and the consequence of that behavior. This behavioral approach says that when a desirable result follows an action, the behavior becomes more likely to happen again in the future. Conversely, responses followed by adverse outcomes become less likely to reoccur. In short, it is about feedback and or reinforcement. Behaviorism can be used to help students to learn, such as by influencing lesson design. For instance, some teachers use consistent encouragement to help students learn. That is operant conditioning. While others focus on creating a stimulating environment to increase engagement. That is classical conditioning. Here is behaviorism used in the classroom. First, we have rewards and punishment, two practices that are linked to behaviorist theory. According to Skinner, rewards increase the likelihood that behaviors will be repeated, while punishments decrease the likelihood of repetition. He also theorized that rewards and punishments could be either positive or negative in nature. Second, responsibility for student learning rests squarely with the teacher, as learners hold on to their teachers to make arrangement or for the conditioning. Lecture-based and highly structured. It consists only of what can be observed, such as the stimuli and responses. Critics of behaviorism. One is it does not account for processes taking place in the mind that cannot be observed, as behavioral theory says that the only observable behavior should be studied. It advocates for passive student learning in a teacher-centric environment. This particular learning theory assumes that the learner is essentially passive who simply responds to their environmental stimuli. And this theory of behaviorism is one-size-fits-all approach. It relies on operant conditioning, which is the behaviorist term for this style of learning based on the repetition where students' behaviors are shaped by what works or does not work. While a simple theory, behaviorism does not recognize that life does not take place in a laboratory, and the use of rewards and punishment is not conducive to intrinsic learning. Last is that behaviorism is programmed instruction and teacher proofing. The theory dictated that the learner should then receive some sort of reinforcer if the response were correct. From a behaviorist perspective, the role of the learner is to be acted upon by the teacher-controlled environment. The teacher's role is to manipulate the environment to shape behavior. Thus, the student is not an agent in the learning process, but rather an animal that instinctively reacts to the environment. Another learning theory that we are going to talk about is cognitivism. This learning theory focuses on how information is received, organized, stored, and retrieved by the minds. The cognitivist theory replaced the behaviorism during the 1960s as a more dominant learning paradigm. Cognitivism counters the behaviorist theory stating people are not programmable test subjects that merely respond to environmental stimuli and ignore the idea that thinking plays an important role. Instead, they are rational beings who can take active participation in learning and whose actions are a consequence of their thoughts. Cognitivism concentrates on the mental activities of the learner's mind. It considers that learning about those activities is valuable and necessary to understand how we learn. Spurred by the work of Piaget, constructivism, knowledge is viewed as symbolic mental constructs or schemata. When a learner's schemata are changed, learning takes place. Cognitivism considers the mind as an analytical machine, like a computer. Information comes in, it gets processed, and causes certain outcomes. In Piaget's stages of cognitive development, it shows that cognitive development involves changes in cognitive process and abilities. In Piaget's view, early cognitive development involves processes based upon actions and later progresses to changes in mental operations. And the first stage of Piaget's stages of cognitive development is the sensory motor stage, that is 0 to 2 years. During this earliest stage of cognitive development, infants and toddlers acquire knowledge through sensory experiences and manipulating objects. A child's entire experience at the earliest period of this stage occurs through basic reflexes, senses, and motor responses. And as of the second stage, this is the pre-operational stage, that is 2 to 7 years. This is wherein the foundation of language development may have been laid during the previous stage, but the emergence of language is one of the major hallmarks of the pre-operational stage development. For the third stage, it is the concrete operational stage, 7 to 12 years. Okay, here, while children are very concrete and literal in their thinking at this point in development, they become more adept at using logic. The egocentrism of the previous stage begins to disappear as kids become better at thinking about how other people might view a situation. And the last stage of Piaget's stages of cognitive development is the formal operational stage. That is 12 and up. Okay, here involves an increase in logic, the ability to use deductive reasoning and understanding of abstract ideas. And at this point, adolescents and young adults become capable of seeing multiple potential solutions to problems and think more scientifically about the world around them. Discovery learning was introduced by Jerome Bruner and is a method of inquiry-based instruction. This popular theory encourages learners to build on past experiences and knowledge, use their intuition, imagination, and creativity, and for the search for new information to discover facts, correlations, and new truths. Learning does not equal observing what was said or read, but actively seeking for answers and solutions. According to Brunner, anybody can learn anything at any age, provided it is stated in terms they can understand. And some powerful concepts of discovery learning: transfer to many different situations, only possible through discovery learning, confronts the learner with problems and help them find solutions. Do not present sequence materials. Real-life scenarios are given to the learner where they face the challenge of solving these problems on their own. The learner uses what they know as well as previous experiences to draw upon conclusions for solving and learning. The learner interacts with the world around them, all the while exploring and questioning during the experimentation and the use of trial and error. Children love being in charge of their own learning. It gives them the sense of self-worth. It makes the learning more desirable and attainable. Teachers give a problem to their students and set their students free to solve on their own, discovering as they go. The techniques utilized in discovery learning can vary, but the goal is always the same, and that is the learners to reach the end result on their own. By exploring and manipulating situations, struggling with questions and controversies, or by performing experiments, learners are more likely to remember concepts and newly acquired knowledge. Meanwhile, meaningful learning takes place when an idea is related in some sensible way to ideas that the learner possesses. Ausubel believed that before new material can be presented effectively, the student's cognitive structure should be strengthened. And he used Advanced Organizer. Advanced Organizer is a major tool proposed by Ausubel, and it gives two benefits. You'll find it easier to connect with new information with what you already know about the topic, and you can readily see how the concepts in a certain topic are related to each other. Cognitive in the classroom. It is inquiry-oriented projects. It provides opportunities for testing of hypotheses. Curiosity is encouraged, and it stages scaffolding. Comments of cognitivism. Like behaviorism, knowledge itself is given an absolute. Input process output model is mechanistic and deterministic. It does not account enough for individuality. It has little emphasis on affective characteristics. Cognitivism, like behaviorism, emphasizes the role that environmental conditions play in facilitating learning. Instructional explanations, demonstrations, illustrative examples, and much non-examples are all considered to be instrumental in guiding student learning. Similarly, emphasis is placed on the role of practice with corrective feedback.
Now let's go to social learning theory. So what is social learning theory? This theory was proposed by a psychologist named Albert Bandura. He emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Social learning theory considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. Now, learning is a remarkably complex process that is influenced by a wide variety of factors, and these grew out of cognitivism. Learning takes place through observation and sensorial experiences. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And lastly, social learning is the basis of the movement against violence in media and video games. So, as most parents are probably very much aware, observation can play a critical role in determining how and what children learn. As the saying goes, kids are very much like sponges, soaking up the experiences they have each and every day. Now, what are the keys in learning from models? They are: attend to pertinent clues, code for memory or store visual image, retain memory, accurately reproduce the observed activity, and possess sufficient motivation to apply new learning. Individuals that are observed are called models. In society, children are surrounded by many influential models, such as your parents, within the family, characters on children's TV, friends within their peer group, and teachers at school. So these models provide examples of behavior to observe and imitate. Example, masculine and feminine, pro and antisocial, and etc. Children pay attention to some of these person or models and encode their behavior. At a later time, they may imitate or copy the behavior they have observed. They may do this regardless of whether the behavior is gender appropriate or not, but there are a number of processes that make it more likely that a child will reproduce the behavior that society deems appropriate for its gender. Now, research indicates that the following factors influence the strength of learning from models. So these are how much power the model seems to have, how capable the model seems to be, how nurturing or caring the model seems to be, and how similar the learner perceives self and model, and lastly, how many models the learner observes. So Bandura identified 3 basic models of observational learning. So the first one is a live model, which involves an actual individual demonstrating or acting out a behavior. The second one is a symbolic model, which involves real or fictional characters displaying behaviors in books, films, television programs, or online media. And the last one is a verbal instructional model, which involves descriptions and explanations of a behavior. So as you can see, observational learning does not even necessarily require watching another person to engage in an activity. Hearing verbal instructions, such as listening to a podcast, can lead to learning. We can also learn by reading, hearing, or watching the actions of characters in books and films. So there are 4 interrelated processes established and strengthen identification with the model. So first, children want to be like the model. Children believe they are like the model. Children experience emotion like those the model is feeling. And lastly, children act like the model. So one of the best known experiments in the history of psychology involved a doll named Voodoo. Bandura demonstrated that children learn and imitate behaviors they have observed in other people. The children in Bandura studies observed an adult acting violently toward the voodoo doll. When the children were later allowed to play in a room with a voodoo doll, they began to imitate the aggressive actions they had previously observed. So social learning theory learns through identification. Children come to believe they have the same characteristics as the model. When they identify with a nurturing and competent model, children feel pleased and proud. When they identify with an inadequate model, children feel unhappy and insecure. So identification occurs with another person or the model and involves taking on or adopting observed behaviors, values, beliefs, and attitude of the person with whom you are identifying. The term identification as used by social learning theory is similar to the Freudian term related to the Oedipus complex. For example, they both involve internalizing or adopting another person's behavior. However, during the Oedipus complex, the child can only identify with the same-sex parent, whereas the social learning theory, the person or the child can potentially identify with any other person. So identification is different to imitation as it may involve a number of behaviors being adopted, whereas imitation usually involves copying a single behavior. So how social learning theory in the classroom is applied? So it is through collaborative learning and group work, modeling responses and expectations. There are opportunities to observe experts in action. So social learning theory in the is seen through. So, how do we determine when something has been learned? In many cases, learning can be seen immediately when the new behavior is displayed. When you teach a child to ride a bicycle, you can quickly determine if learning has occurred by having the child ride his or her bike unassisted. But sometimes we are able to learn things even though that learning might not be immediately obvious. While behaviorists believe that learning led to a permanent change in behavior. Observational learning demonstrates that people can learn new information without demonstrating new behaviors. So, what about social constructivism? So, social constructivism is a social learning theory that is developed by a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky. So, what is it about? All knowledge develops as a result of social interaction and language use, and is therefore a shared rather than individual experience. Social constructivism is the view that learning occurs through social interaction and the help of others, often in a group. Social constructivism posits that the understanding an individual develops is shaped through social interaction. So, a social constructivism grew out in response to cognitivism and was framed around metacognition. Knowledge is actively constructed. So, what is learning? Learning is a search for meaning by the learner, contextualize, an inherently social activity, dialogic and recursive, the responsibility of the learner. So, at the foundation of this theory is the belief that knowledge is not a copy of an objective reality but is rather the result, the mind selecting and making sense of and recreating experiences. So, this means that knowledge is the result of interactions between both subjective and environmental factors. So, how social constructivism in the classroom being applied? So, that is through journaling, experimental or experiential activities, personal focus, and collaborative and cooperative learning. So, constructivist classrooms are often very different from normal classrooms in many ways. Constructivist classrooms focus on student questions and interest. They build on what students already know. They focus on interactive learning and are student-centered. Teachers have a dialogue with students to help them construct their own knowledge. They root in negotiation and students work primarily in groups. Constructivist classrooms often have teachers who do small group work, collaborative and interactive activities, and open dialogues about what students need in order to find success.
And to continue, so another part of educational theory is multiple intelligences. This grew out of constructivism and was framed around metacognition. When we hear the word intelligence, the concept of IQ testing will immediately come to our mind. Intelligence is often defined as our intellectual potential, something we are born with, something that can be measured, in a capacity that is difficult to change. In recent years, however, other views of intelligence have emerged. One such conception is the theory of multiple intelligences proposed by Harvard psychologist Howard Gardner. Gardner proposed that there are 8 intelligences and has suggested the possible addition of a ninth known as existentialist intelligence. In order to capture the full range of abilities and talents that people possess, Gardner theorizes that people do not have just an intellectual capacity, but have many kinds of intelligence, including musical, interpersonal, spatial, visual, and linguistic intelligences. Gardner's theory has come under criticism from both psychologists and educators. These critics argue that Gardner's definition of intelligence is too broad, and that his 8 different intelligences simply represent talents, personality traits, and abilities. Gardner's theory also suffers from a lack of supporting empirical research. But despite this, the theory of multiple intelligences enjoys considerable popularity with educators. Many teachers utilize multiple intelligences in their teaching philosophies and work to integrate Gardner's theory into the classroom. Learning more about the multiple intelligences can help you better understand your own strengths. And to learn more about the major characteristics of each type of intelligence, and if you still aren't sure which type describes you best, this can help you figure it out. Gardner's theory believes that all people are born with these eight intelligences: verbal linguistic, visual spatial, logical mathematical, kinesthetic, musical, naturalist, interpersonal. This enables students to leverage their strength and purposely target and develop their weaknesses. People who are strong in verbal linguistic intelligence are able to use words well, both when writing and speaking. These individuals are typically good at writing stories, memorizing information, and reading. Visual linguistic people are good at words, language, and writing. So they remember written and spoken information easily. They enjoy reading and writing. They love debate and give persuasive speeches. And they're able to explain things well. They use humor when telling stories. And their potential career choices are the following: writer or journalist, lawyer, or a teacher. Another intelligence, according to Gardner, is the visual spatial. People who are strong in visual spatial intelligence are good at visualizing things. These individuals are often good with directions as well as maps, charts, videos, and pictures. And they are good in visual and spatial judgment. And and those people who have visual spatial intelligence are good to write, or they love to write and read for enjoyment. They're good at putting puzzles together, interpret pictures, graphs, and charts well. They enjoy drawing, painting, and the visual arts. They recognize patterns easily, and their potential career choices are: they can be an architect, an artist, or an. In another theory or another intelligence in Gardner's theory is the logical mathematical. And people who are strong in logical mathematical intelligence are good at reasoning, recognizing patterns, and logically analyzing problems. These individuals tend to think conceptually about numbers, relationships, and patterns. And they are good in analyzing problems and mathematical operations. And those people have excellent problem-solving skills. They enjoy thinking about abstract ideas. They like conducting scientific experiments, and they can solve complex computations. Those people can be scientists, mathematicians. They can also be a computer programmer, an engineer, and an accountant. Another intelligence in Gardner's theory is the kinesthetic, and those people who have high bodily kinesthetic intelligence are said to be good at body movement, performing actions, and physical control. People who are strong in this area tend to have excellent hand-eye coordination and dexterity, and they are good in physical movement and motor control. And those people are good or are skilled at dancing and sports. They enjoy creating things with his or her hands. They have excellent physical coordination, and they remember by doing rather than hearing or seeing. So these people can be dancers, builders, sculptors, or actors. Next intelligence mentioned in Gardner's theory is musical. So people who have strong musical intelligences or intelligence are good at thinking in patterns, rhythms, and sounds. They have a strong appreciation for music and are often good at musical composition and performance. They're good in rhythmic and music. These people enjoy singing and playing musical instruments. They recognize musical patterns and tones easily. They remember songs and melodies, have a rich understanding of musical structure, rhythm, and notes. And they can be musician, a composer. They can be singer, music teacher, or a conductor. Another intelligence mentioned in Gardner's theory is the naturalist. Naturalistic is the most recent addition to Gardner's theory and has been met with more resistance than his original seven intelligences. According to Gardner, individuals who are high in this type of intelligence are more in tune with nature and are often interested in nurturing, exploring the environment, and learning about other species. These individuals are said to be highly aware of even subtle changes to their environments. They're good in finding patterns and relationships to nature. These people are interested in subjects such as botany, biology, and zoology. They categorize and catalog information easily, enjoy camping, gardening, hiking, and exploring the outdoors, and they dislike learning unfamiliar topics that have no connection to nature. And these people can be biologist, conservationist, gardener, or, or and next in line is the interpersonal intelligence. And those who have strong interpersonal intelligence are good at understanding and interacting with other people. These individuals are skilled at assessing the emotions, motivations, desires, and intentions of those around them. They are good in understanding and relating to other people. These people can communicate well verbally. They are skilled at nonverbal communication. They see situations from different perspectives. They create positive relationships with others, and they resolve conflicts in group settings. These people can be psychologist, philosopher, counselor, salesperson, or and last in line is the intrapersonal intelligence. According to Gardner, individuals who are strong in intrapersonal intelligence are good at being aware of their own emotional states, their feelings, and their motivations. They tend to enjoy self reflection and analysis, including daydreaming, exploring relationships with others, and assessing their personal strengths. These people are good in introspection and self reflection. These individuals can analyze their strengths and weaknesses well. They enjoy analyzing theories and ideas. They have excellent self awareness. They understand the basis for his or her own motivations and feelings. And these people can be philosophers, they can be writers, theorists, or even scientists. Multiple intelligence in the classroom delivered instruction is through via multiple mediums. It is a student-centered classroom, and there is an authentic assessment, and it's a self-directed learning classroom. Another educational theory is the humanism. Teachers are always looking for ways to improve our methods to help our students thrive in the classroom. Different learning theories and techniques help us connect with our different students based on their learning styles and abilities. Teaching strategies that are student-centered often have great success in helping students learn and grow better. Learner-centered approaches place the student as the authority in the educational setting, helping ensure that they are the focus of education and are in control of their learning to an extent. The idea of student-centered learning is an example of the humanistic learning theory in action. It's valuable for current and aspiring educators alike to learn about student-centered education and other humanistic approaches to use in the classroom. These approaches can be vital in helping our students truly learn and succeed in their education. So let us learn more about the humanistic learning theory and discover how it can be implemented in our classroom. In the history, humanistic psychology is an outlook or a system of thought that focuses on human beings rather than supernatural or divine insight. This system stresses that human beings are inherently good and that basic needs are vital to human behaviors. Humanistic psychology also focuses on finding rational ways to solve these human problems. At its root, the psychology of humanism focuses on human virtue. It has been an important movement throughout history, from Greek and Latin roots to Renaissance and now modern revivals. This theory and approach in education takes root in humanistic psychology, with the key concepts focusing on the idea that children are good at the core and that education should focus on rational ways to teach the whole child. This theory states that the student is the authority on how they learn and that all of their needs should be met in order for them to learn well. For example, a student who is hungry won't have as much attention to give to learning. So schools offer meals to students so that need is met and they focus on education. The humanistic theory approach engages social skills, feelings, intellect, artistic skills, practical skills, and more as part of their education. Self-esteem, goals, and full autonomy are key learning elements in the humanistic learning theory. The humanistic learning theory was developed by Abraham Maslow, who is considered as the father of the movement, with Carl Rogers and James F. T. Bugental in the early 1900s. Humanism was a response to the common educational theories at the time, which were the behaviorism and psychoanalysis. Humanism stresses that human beings are inherently good and that basic needs are vital to human behaviors. And all students are intrinsically motivated to self-actualize or learn. And learning is dependent upon meeting our hierarchy of needs. It's physiological, psychological, and intellectual needs. And humanism believes that learning should be reinforced. There are several important principles involved in the humanistic learning theory that all lead to self-actualization. Self-actualization is when your needs are met, you've become the best you can, and you are fulfilled. While Maslow and the humanists don't believe that most people reach self-actualization, their belief is that we are always in search of it. And the closer we are, the more we can learn. One of the principles of humanistic learning theory is student choice. Choice is central to the humanistic learning theory and humanistic psychology. Humanistic learning is student-centered, so students are encouraged to take control over their education. They make choices that can range from daily activities to future goals. Students are encouraged to focus on a specific subject area of interest for a reasonable amount of time that they choose. Teachers who utilize humanistic learning believe that it's crucial for students to find motivation and engagement in their learning, and that is more likely to happen when students are choosing to learn about something they really want to know. The second principle of this theory is fostering engagement to inspire students to become self-motivated to learn. The effectiveness of the psychology approach is based on learners feeling engaged and self-motivated, so they want to learn. So humanistic learning relies on educators working on to engage students, encouraging them to find things they are passionate about, so they are excited about learning. The next one is the importance of self-evaluation. For most humanistic teachers, grades don't really matter. evaluation is the most meaningful way to evaluate how learning is going. Grading students encourages students to work for the grade instead of doing things based on their own satisfaction and excitement of learning. Routine testing and rote memorization don't lead to meaningful learning in this theory, and thus aren't encouraged by humanistic teachers. Humanistic educators help students perform self-evaluations so they can see how students feel about their progress. So another principle of this theory is feelings and knowledge are both important to the learning process and should not be separated according to humanistic psychology. Humanistic teachers believe that knowledge and feelings go hand in hand in the learning process. Cognitive and affective learning are both important to humanistic learning. Lessons and activities should focus on the whole student and their intellect and feelings, not one or the other. And finally, the last principle mentioned in this theory is a safe learning environment. Because humanistic learning focuses on the entire student, humanistic educators understand that they need to create a safe environment so students can have as many as their needs met as possible. They need to feel safe physically, mentally, and emotionally in order to be able to focus on learning. So, humanistic educators are passionate about the idea of helping students meet as many of their needs as possible. Roles of a teacher in the humanistic learning theory. In the humanistic learning theory, teachers and students have specific roles for success. The overall role of a teacher is to be a facilitator and role model, not necessarily to be the one doing the teacher. The role of the teacher includes the roles of teacher in the humanistic learning theory. One is to teach learning skills. The teachers in humanistic learning theory focus on helping students develop learning skills. Students are responsible for learning choices, so helping them understand the best ways to learn is key to their success. Next, teachers provide motivation for classroom tasks. Humanistic learning focuses on engagement, so teachers need to provide motivation and exciting activities to help students feel engaged about learning. Next, teachers provide choices to students in task or subject selection. Choice is central to humanistic learning, so teachers have a role in helping work with students to make choices about what to learn. They may offer options, help students evaluate what they are excited about, and more. And finally, teachers create opportunities for group work with peers. So as a facilitator in the classroom, teachers create group opportunities to help students explore, observe, and self-evaluate. They can do things or this better as they interact with other students who are learning at the same time that they are. Best practices from humanistic theory to bring to your classroom. Because a teaching degree is a crucial step for those who want to be teachers. A degree can help them learn about current practices and trends in teaching, learning theories, and how to apply them to the classroom. Established teachers can also greatly benefit from continuing education and continuously expanding their techniques. When considering their own teaching practices, teachers can work to incorporate humanistic theory into their classroom. And this is by making time to collaborate with other educators. This is by co-planning lessons with other teachers, by evaluating student needs and wants regularly, by connecting with parents to help meet specific student needs, and by preparing to try new things with students regularly. So these are the best practices from humanistic theory that we can bring to our classrooms. And the next educational theory that we are going to discuss is about connectivism. So, what is connectivism? Connectivism is relatively new learning theory that suggests students should combine thoughts, theories, and general information in a useful manner. It accepts that technology is a major part of the learning process and that our constant connectedness gives us opportunities to make choices about our learning. It also promotes group collaboration and discussion, allowing for different viewpoints and perspectives when it comes to decision making, problem solving, and making sense of information. Connectivism promotes learning that happens outside of an individual, such as through social media, online networks, blogs, or information databases. Connectivism was first introduced in 2005 by two theorists, George Siemens and Stephen Downes. Siemens' article Connectivism Learning as a Network Creation was published online in 2004, and Downes' article An Introduction to Connective Knowledge was published the following year. The publications address the important role of technology plays in the learning process and how the digital age has increased the speed at which students have access to information. Since then, both Siemens and Downs have continued to write and speak on the subject. However, each has slightly different viewpoints. While Siemens tends to focus on the social aspects of connectivism, Downs focuses on non-human appliances and machine-based learning. Nodes and links in connectivism. According to connectivism, learning is more than our own internal construction of knowledge. Rather, what we can reach in our external networks is also considered to be learning from this theory. Two terms, nodes and links, have been commonly used to describe how we gain and connect to information in a network. In connectivism, students are seen as nodes in a network. A node refers to any object that can be connected to any object, like a book, web page, person, etc. Connectivism is based on the theory that we learn when we make connections or links between various nodes of information, and we continue to make and maintain connections to form knowledge. There are also some principles of connectivism. Connectivism builds on already established theories to propose that technology is changing what, how, and where we learn. In the research, Siemens and Downs identified 8 principles of connectivism. And what are these principles of connectivism? One of these principles, according to Siemens and Downs, is that learning and knowledge rest in the diversity of opinions. Learning is a process of connecting. Next, learning may reside in a non-human appliances. And learning is more critical than knowing. Another principle, nurturing and maintaining connections are needed for continual learning. And the ability to see connections between fields, ideas, and concepts is a core skill. And also, according to Siemens and Downs, accurate, up-to-date knowledge is the aim of all connectivist learning. And finally, decision making is a learning process. So what we know today might change tomorrow. While there is a right answer now, it might be wrong tomorrow due to the constantly changing information climate. So what to bring connectivism in the classroom? It's one thing to understand that connectivism is and another to actually incorporate it in the classroom in learning activities. Remember that in a connectivist viewpoint, the new learning responsibilities shift from the teacher to the learner. So unlike traditional teaching methods and other theories like constructivism or cognitivism, the educator's job is to guide students to become effective agents to their own learning and personal development. In other words, it's up to the learner to create their own learning experience, engage in decision making, and enhance their learning network. Connectivism relies heavily on technology. So the first step to creating a connectivist classroom is to introduce more opportunities for digital learning, like online courses or classes, webinars, social networks, and blogs. And here are some ways to incorporate connectivism in the classroom. First, the social media. One way teachers implement connectivism is through the use of classroom social media. For example, a class Twitter account can be used to share information, engage in class discussion, or announce homework tasks. This can help boost class engagement and open the lines of discussion among students and teachers. Next, gamification. Gamification takes assignments and activities and puts them into a competitive game to make learning more of an interactive experience. So there are many learning-based applications and instructional technologies teachers can use to add an element of gamification to the classroom. And one of those is a Duolingo. It is an online learning tool that helps students learn languages through fun, game-like lessons. Teachers can track students' progress while students can earn points for progressing through lessons. Other examples include applications like Brainscape, Virtual Reality House, and GameKate, just to name a few. Next is simulations. Simulations engage students in deep learning that empowers understanding as opposed to surface learning that only requires memorization. They also add interest and fun to a classroom setting. Take, for example, a physics class where students create an electric circuit with an online program. So instead of being instructed via a book or a classroom lecture, they're learning about physics by simulating an actual physical setup. So incorporating some of all these examples is a great way to allow your students more control over the pacing and content of their learning. It also provides opportunities for individualized learning to match each student's unique needs and strengths. So, what are the pros of connectivism? Both the student and the educator can benefit from connectivism in the classroom. If you're considering adopting this theory in your current or future classroom, consider the following benefits. So first benefit of connectivism is it creates collaboration. So within connectivism, learning occurs when peers are connected and share opinions, viewpoints, and ideas through a collaborative process. Connectivism allows community of people to legitimize what they're doing, so knowledge can be spread more quickly through multiple communities. Another benefit for connectivism is it empowers students and teachers. Connectivism shifts the learning responsibilities from the teacher to the student. It's up to the learner to create their own learning experience. The role of the educator then becomes to create learning ecologies, shape communities, and release learners into the environment, according to Shimon in 2003. Another benefit, connectivism embraces diversity. Connectivism supports individual perspectives and the diversity of opinions, theoretically providing for no hierarchy in the value of knowledge. If you're a current educator or aspiring to be one, it's important to understand how different learning theories can benefit your classroom and help your students find success. And finally, the last educational theory in our topic is the brain-based learning. Brain-based learning is motivated by the general belief that learning can be accelerated and improved if educators base how and what they teach on the science of learning rather than on the past educational practices, established conventions, or assumptions about the learning process. There are 12 governing principles in the brain-based learning theory. So, number one, the brain is a parallel processor. Number two, learning engages the entire physiology. Number three, the search for meaning is innate. Number four, the search for meaning occurs through patterning. Number five, emotions are critical to patterning. Number six, every brain simultaneously perceives and creates parts and wholes. Seven, learning involves both focused attention and peripheral perception. Eight, learning always involves conscious and unconscious processes. Number nine, we have at least two types of memory, a special memory system and a set of systems for rote learning. Number 10, the brain understands and remembers best when facts and skills are embedded in natural spatial memory. Number 11, learning is enhanced by challenge and inhibited by threat. And finally, each brain is unique, and that would be the 12. So let's take it one by one. One, the brain is a processor. So what does this mean? So it means that thoughts, intuitions, predispositions, and emotions operate simultaneously and interact with other modes of information. So good teaching takes this into consideration. That's why we talk about the teacher as an orchestrator of learning. Number two, whole body learning. What does this mean? So this means that the physical health of the child, the amount of sleep, the nutrition greatly affects the brain. So the moods. We are physiologically programmed and we have cycles that we have to be honored. An adolescent who does not get enough sleep one night will not absorb much new information the next day because fatigue will affect the brain's memory. Number three, the search for meaning is innate. This means that we are naturally programmed to search for meaning. This principle is survival oriented. The brain needs and automatically registers the familiar while simultaneously searching for and responding to additional stimuli. So what does this mean for education? It means that the learning environment needs to provide stability and familiarity. Provision must be made to satisfy the hunger for novelty, discovery, and challenge. At the same time, lessons need to be exciting and meaningful and offer students an abundance of choices. Or number four, the search for meaning occurs through patterning. Patterning refers to the organization and categorization of information. The brain resists having meaningless patterns imposed upon it. By meaningless, we mean isolated and unrelated pieces of information. When the brain's natural capacity to integrate information is invoked in teaching, vast amounts of seemingly unrelated or random information and activities can be presented and assimilated. The brain tries to make sense of the information by reducing it to familiar patterns. Number five, the emotions are critical to patterning. So one of the things that this theory wants to erase is the notion of the affective domain, the cognitive domain, and the psychomotor domain. We have been taught that For years, even though the evidence from the brain research indicates that this is not the case, in the brain, we cannot separate out emotion from cognition. So it is an interacting web of factors. Everything has some emotion to it. In fact, many brain researchers believe that there is no memory without emotion. Emotions are what motivate us to learn, to create, and they are in our moods. They are our passion. They are part of who we are as human beings. We need to understand more about them and accept them. And number six, every brain simultaneously perceives and creates parts and wholes. So several neuroscientists across the country to visit the country to discuss these 12 principles. And one of the things that they found was that they were very hesitant to speak because, or with the educators, because they were frightened of what they would do with the information. Educators had gone wild with the left brain and right brain research. They had been based entire consulting firms on it. But to this neuroscientist, they had greatly oversimplified it. So they went back over the research and said, yes, there is something to the hemispheric theory. However, the real message for us as educators is that we need to engage both sides, which in real life we do anyway. So as educators, we want our learners to use both the left and the right hemispheres. We want the whole brain strategies. So the left brain, right brain doctrine has some meaning, but it is most useful as a metaphor for the fact that the brain processes parts and wholes simultaneously. Okay, number seven, focused attention and peripheral perceptions. So children learn from everything. Everything goes into the brain. In the early years, they literally become their experiences. Therefore, the environment is very important. And if they learn something in the classroom and never use it outside the classroom, then that learning, those connections stop there. In other societies, children are immersed in learning in the school, in the home, in the community. Their knowledge is used and is expanded upon. They interact with each other in this rich learning environment. Number eight, learning always involves conscious and unconscious processes. We already learn much more than we ever consciously understand. Most of the signals that are peripherally perceived enter the brain without our awareness and interact on an unconscious levels. This is why we say that learners become their experience and remember what they experience, not just what they are told. What we call active processing allows students to review how and what they've absorbed, so they begin to take charge of their learning and of the development of personal meaning. Meaning is not always available on the surface. Meaning often happens intuitively in ways that we don't understand, so that when we learn, we use both conscious and unconscious processes. In teaching, you may not reach a student immediately, but 2 years later, he may be in another class and say, I get it now. So you are part of it, or you are part of it, but you are no longer present. Number nine principle, several types of memory. So we have at least two types of memory, a special memory system and a set of system for rote learning. So the special memory system or the autobiographical system does not need rehearsal and allows for instant memory of experiences. It is very important for educators to understand these two systems and how they work. In the taxon memory system, things are learned by rote. We memorize information, but that doesn't mean we can use the information. The taxon system has nothing to do with imagination or creativity. It conforms very readily to the information processing model of memory. With this system, students are motivated by reward and punishment. Many trials are usually needed, and the brain is easily fatigued since there is stress on a limited number of brain cells. This is the model schools are based on. We have limited education to programming this system and teaching to the test. Can you see why people would say that our educational system is based on teaching to the test? The local memory system is very global. It doesn't stress one particular area. So when you experience or when we experience something deeply meaningful, we're creating those new connections. And now, number 10 principle is the embedded learning sticks. So what does this mean? The solution is to embed taxon learning by immersing learners in a well-orchestrated, lifelike, low-threat, high-challenge learning environment. We need to take the information off the blackboard to make it come alive in the minds of learners and to help them to make connections. So embedded learning sticks. Number 11, the learning is enhanced by challenge and inhibited by threat. In the classroom, downshifting is seen as a threat related to a sense of helplessness. It has implications for testing and for grading, for the notion of the teacher as the controller or for empowerment, for performance objectives. The learners must be engaged in learning, not that we throw performance objectives or tests out, but we need to understand what we are doing to the human brain under these conditions. And the last one, the number 12 principle is each brain is unique. This looks at learning style and unique ways of patterning. We have many things in common, but we are also very, very different and unique. We need to understand how we learn and how we perceive the world and to know what men and women see the world differently. So in the classroom, brain-based learning provides opportunities for group learning. It gives regular environmental changes, a multi-sensory environment, and gives opportunities for self-expression and making personal connections to content. And it is also a community-based learning. But this theory, there are a lot of critics of this brain-based learning theory, and some of those is that the research was conducted by neuroscientists and not by teachers and educational researchers. The second one, lack of understanding of the brain itself makes brain-based learning questionable. Finally, individual principles have been scientifically questioned. So these are the three critics of the brain-based learning. That's the end of our report. Thank you and God bless. So we are the group 3. I am Mrs. Diosa Malyari, and with me, my group mates are Mrs. Lysel Balungkas and Ma'am Rose Jane Sumalino. Thank you and God bless.